Hello. Today we're going to continue the cardiovascular system and we're going to speak specifically about what makes up blood. So, starting off with what makes it up, blood is the only fluid tissue in the body. It's also a type of connective tissue. If you remember, connective tissue is different from our other three tissue types because it has an extracellular matrix. So it has a bunch of material that's non-living, and then the cells are spread out in it. Compare that with like epithelial tissue, which is a bunch of cells really close together, and you can see kind of how unique it is to have a matrix. In blood, the matrix is the fluid, the plasma, and then the cells are called formed elements, and they float in the plasma. And the formed elements are erythrocytes, or red blood cells, leukocytes, or white blood cells, and platelets. If we take a blood sample and then we centrifuge it, a centrifuge is a machine that spins really fast, and when it spins, it separates things based on their density. If we do this, we can see the different parts of the blood. So down here at the bottom, this whole red layer, those are all erythrocytes. So about 45% is red blood cells. That's a lot. Like almost half of our blood is red blood cells. Little teeny layer right here, that's the leukocytes and the platelets. So we have very few white blood cells and platelets in our bloodstream. We don't need them all the time. We would only need them if something attacks, then the white blood cells would fight it off. And by the way, when I say something, I mean like a bacteria or a virus. And then the platelets are going to help blood clot, but only when we get a cut. Then all the rest of it is the plasma, the liquid matrix. Cool facts about blood. You probably know that it's sticky, like it's more viscous than water, and it has a metallic taste from the hemoglobin. It contains iron. The color varies with the oxygen content. So blood that has a lot of oxygen is going to be scarlet red, like our school colors. It's a very bright red color. And then blood with less oxygen appears darker red. There's this misconception that sometimes our blood is blue, but really it's only dark red. And when we see our veins through our skin, it just kind of appears blue. But all anatomy textbooks will use this symbolism that arteries carrying oxygenated blood are scarlet red or red, and then veins, which are carrying deoxygenated blood, are darker red, which they draw as blue because it's easier to tell apart on diagrams. pH is neutral. 8% of our body weight is our blood. That seems crazy to me. And in males should be about 5 to 6 liters. So picture a 2 liter, like 2 liters of blood in you, and females 4 to 5 liters, just a little bit less because on average females are smaller. Now let's talk about the specific components. These are bags of plasma up here. So you can see it's kind of this tan straw color. And these are frozen, but it is pretty viscous. That's why we say blood is kind of sticky. It's mostly water, like 90% water, but it does contain various dissolved solvents. This would be where all the nutrients and the gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, they're going to be in the plasma or sometimes attached to the red blood cells. Hormones are going to ride through here, waste products, various proteins and ions. One protein worth mentioning that plasma contains is called albumin. Albumin helps maintain the osmotic pressure. So it's the pressure that helps keep the water in the bloodstream. If you remember osmosis at all, that's the movement of water, whether it's going to go into or out of cells, it's all based on the concentration gradient, and albumin helps keep our water in the bloodstream where we need it to be. You might recognize this from down on the levee. This is a place where you can go and they will pay you money to donate your plasma. They actually run it through a machine that separates, like in that picture that I showed you guys earlier, it's going to separate the plasma from the cells. And so they put the cells back into your body and they take the plasma and they pay you for that. Right, next we're going to talk about platelets. So platelets are not cells. If we're being picky, they're kind of like it was one big cell and it split into smaller fragments. So platelets themselves are like little cell fragments. They're responsible for the clotting process that occurs when we get a cut. Platelets are able to stick to the damaged site and form a temporary plug that helps seal the break. So as soon as we get a cut, we're bleeding out, we're going to die, but no, the platelets are there. They are able to stop it. Notice this. There's a cool structure-function relationship here between the resting platelet and the activated platelet. So if there's no cuts going on, the platelets are just going to circulate throughout the bloodstream. But when they become activated, they get kind of sticky and they have these extensions. And this is a zoomed-in picture of some of the extensions right there. And that is how they form like a little platelet plug. Like flat things sticking together wouldn't form a very good seal, but all of these sticky edges makes a better seal, basically. Blood is a weird connective tissue for a lot of reasons, but because most connective tissue is all like fibers and collagen and really strong things. But when platelets become activated, this is when blood is like at its most like a connective tissue because it actually has fibers in it. Erythrocytes. So these are our red blood cells. You might already know that red blood cells are famous for being the only cell that does not have a nucleus. They're basically a big bag of hemoglobin. So red blood cell is full of hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin is what's actually able to bind to the oxygen. There's no nucleus and there's no organelles in here so that there's maximum room for hemoglobin. And leukocytes. These are our white blood cells. Leukocytes are responsible for fighting off invading pathogens like bacteria or viruses or anything like that. There are a whole bunch of different types of white blood cells. We are not really going to learn the different types. We're just going to learn like generically white blood cell as our immune system cell. And we will talk a little bit more about some of these types when we learn more about the immune system. But they're large, they have extensions. If you're familiar with macrophages, white blood cells are also macrophages. So those are cells that are able to basically like they come up to a cell and they engulf it and they eat it. So if there was like a little bacteria, the macrophage would eat it so that it was no longer in our body. Also, white blood cells are kind of cool because they can do something called diapedesis, that word right here, diapedesis. Basically, they're able to slip out between the cells of a capillary or blood vessel. So the blood vessel cells are pretty close together, but what if there's an infection that's like right outside? Well, the white blood cell is actually able to leave and slip out through there. And if you fast forward to 242, you'll be able to see a picture of that. Here is a scanning electron microscope view where you can try to tell everything about. So here's our red blood cells, our bags of hemoglobin. Here's our white blood cells, the immune system cells. And then all of these little things that are like various sizes, those are the platelets, and they're currently in their inactive form. And all of this is floating in liquid plasma. And here's a view that maybe you recognize from our first unit when we looked at it under the microscope. All of these large things are red blood cells. Remember, 45% of our bloodstream is red blood cells. These little teeny things right there, they almost look like little dots. Those are the platelets. And then we normally use a stain that makes the white blood cells appear purple. So any of these really large dark purple cells are white blood cells. And here's a nice video I recommend watching that covers the 4 parts and what they do. And it's kind of like Miss Frizzle, where you're inside of the bloodstream. And please let me know what questions you still have.